Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and today on Hercules and the Space Gods, I welcome you to our Hall of Heroes, where we will honor the memory of Timothy Green Beckley, the living legend who gave us so very much to enhance our lives. And we have with us our panelists today. We have Karen Gonzales, we have Tim Swartz, and we have Setna of Knemet, also known as Michael K. Waterman, and we're expecting some more people to join us soon. I will go last as to give everybody a chance to share first. And we'll start with the legendary Tim, who knew him best.
Hi, Hercules. I'm just right now. I am texting with Brian Young, who hopefully will be on the show in a little bit. He said he's having problems with his laptop,
Ah,
so he's going to continue trying to get connected. So I will finish my text and send it to him, and then I can continue here. Oops, wrong one. All right. My apologies, Hercules. Well, uh,
no,
uh,
thank you for attempting to reach him and to communicate.
oh, Brian's a great guest. I wish I had his voice. You know, he's got that. He has a really beautiful broadcasting type of voice, and yeah, oh yeah, it's nice and deep, and plus he has just a wonderful sense of humor. So hopefully he'll be able to call in. So Hercules, thank you very much for having me on your show tonight to once again talk about Tim Beckley. Did you want me to just briefly mention how we met or anything like that? I mean, I've talked about that before. Do you just want me just to go into it? You know,
Just
some.
go into it. You've talked about it before on our tribute and then a show we had done, I believe, last year as
You're
well.
right.
So
Well,
share what you feel you need to share.
all right. Well, okay. Just before we started recording, you and Setna were talking about the movies that Tim made, and I don't know if if I could talk about that
Sure.
for this show. Okay, great. I was actually involved in making those movies with
Oh,
Tim.
wow.
Yeah, not his very first one, which he made back in I think the early '80s, which he made in New York, um, using actual film. He got the funding to make this movie, and rather than using, which at that time was still, for those kind of movies, still kind of iffy. Instead of using video, he wanted to use film. So I guess he actually got a hold of film stock and made this movie, but in around two, gosh, it would have been around 1999, 2000, Tim decided that he wanted to make some more movies. And but he didn't want to make adult movies. You know, he wanted to make some movies that horror movies, in fact, that he wanted to be able to go out to a wider audience. And he had been seeing these VHS. They basically were just direct VHS movies that
Hmm.
you could go to Blockbusters. I mean, movies that never made it to the theater and just went directly to VHS. And you can find them at your video store. So he wanted to attempt to make some movies like that, and because I had a television background with videography and editing, he asked me if I wanted to help. And I said, well, sure. That sounds like fun. I was always game to do things like that. So we made a series of horror movies. One of them was The Curse of Ed Wood. Um, the other was called Skin Eating Jungle Vampires. And then gosh, we made there was another one called let me think now the exact title, Sandy Hook Lingerie Party Massacre. that
Great titles. Tim always had great titles for his.
oh yeah, yeah, love the titles. Well, and then one that really didn't get a lot of release, that was called, like, gosh, what was that one called? The last one. It was more like a documentary
Mhm.
of people who were interested in the vampire culture, and it featured a lot of the New York Halloween parade, to use as, like, background imagery and things like that. But it was the skin-eating jungle vampires and the Curse of Ed Wood that I was involved heavily with, and involved somewhat with the Sandy Hook movie, but Tim wrote that one and shot most of it, and then I did the editing. I did the editing on all of them. Um, but the Skin Eating Jungle Vampires and the Curse of Ed Wood, it was amazing because they're not very good.
Still.
Uh, they were a lot of fun to make, but it kind of was a situation where um, Tim, for both of these, he flew me into New York, where I spent a couple of days doing, just a bunch of shooting, and then Tim did afterwards, like, a bunch of shooting on his own, and then I had to go and try to combine everything. Tim, bless his heart, he would get kind of like a wild idea and go off script and spend, like, almost an entire day trying to shoot one particular scene. There was one, he had managed to get a hold of some, like, vampire wings. I suppose they were like Halloween, for like a Halloween costume, and he wanted to get this shot of this girl coming out of a coffin and unfurling these wings. And like I said, I mean, it wasn't originally in the script, and he like wasted almost an entire night of shooting trying to get this scene, which never did never did work. It would have looked great if they could have gotten it, but we eventually just weren't able to use it. But those two movies actually um, got a huge amount of airplay all over the place. They both were really popular in Japan. You've heard that term before, popular in Japan. For some reason, they were really popular in Japan, and eventually they ended up getting put on DVDs, which got even more airplay. And when I say airplay, I mean, people were buying them, and for a while they were on various, like, streaming services as well, like Tubi and YouTube videos and things like that. Um, but yeah, they were just really a lot of fun to shoot and edit, and especially like the Curse of Ed Wood. I mean, you could you could see, I hate to say it this way, but you could really see the difference between Beckley's shooting style and mine, because I always used, like, a lot of like colored lights in the background and things like that to heighten the moods, and Tim would just grab the camera and just start shooting. But it for a lot of this stuff, that would give him that raw, almost this was actually happening type of look to it. While mine had more of that, I suppose, that cinematic type of touch, that that did, it didn't have that sense of realism that Beckley had. Beckley, it was almost like he actually would just, like, stumble onto a scene and start shooting. So, those were a lot of fun, and like I said, I never guessed that they would end up getting the amount of airplay that they did. But like you said, I mean, you reviewed
Yes,
some of those
some of them.
movies.
And I actually wrote a large piece on the documentary because at the time I had my television show, And
Hmm.
I was also doing cryptid investigations in Pennsylvania, and we had several cases of cryptids that have been seen by several generations of people living in a particular area. So we're actively investigating. We're investigating hauntings. We're investigating supposed demonic infestation. So we're pretty busy. So that was a documentary that dealt with vampires. So
Right.
even though a part of it was tongue in cheek and hokey, it still fit in with the theme, and that opened the door to more interactions between myself and Tim.
Yeah, I really like that one, and again, the title escapes me because he actually went through a couple of them, a couple of titles from very because each distributor, I think that he would just give it a different title to widen its airplay. But that one was really. I wish that one. I wish that he had paid more attention to that one. By the time that one came around, he was as Tim was. I mean, he was starting to get bored with them and was going on and to do different things. That's the way it was with Tim with these kinds of projects. Is that he'd be really all hot and heavy on them, but then after a while. He'd be done with them, and it would be off to do some other new adventure. Which that was the fun of dealing with Tim Beckley, because you just never knew which direction that he was going to go the next day. And, uh, um, and I think that was why we got along and worked together so well is because I mean I was always happy to zig when he zigged and zagged when he zagged, because I was always I'm a, I was always just more than happy to be involved with these ideas, because to me they were always really exciting and new and fun and different, and that's just the type of personality that I had as well, which is why that we meshed and worked together so well, because say like with the books or magazine articles, he would come to me and said, can you write an article about space vampires. I'll just use that as an example. I don't think I
Uh,
ever wrote anything about space vampires, and find me some stories about space vampires. And I'm like, sure, you betcha I can. And I always could, no matter what subject, no matter how wild, he would ask me for these things. I always, managed to dig up some stories for them. Which again, I think that's why Tim liked working with me because, I was a very intensive researcher and knew a lot of sources. And so then, I could always come up with something that would fit within the categories that he needed. Um, but
for Commander X for a while. You became the new Commander X, which is
no, well, no, I was never Commander. I was never Commander X. I wrote with Commander X, all right, but Commander X is a separate person. I wish I knew who Commander X was because it was, when I first really started writing books for Beckley, I actually took over some Commander X books that he was going to write for Tim under contract, but then he had some kind of health issue. He had heart problems, I guess is what it was, and couldn't complete them. One of them was invisibility, an invisibility book. One was a teleportation book, and the other one was time travel, and he couldn't complete those books. So Beckley ended up sending me the material that Commander X had started writing, and some of the research material, and then I finished him up. And then later I collaborated with Commander X, but it was always kind of weird because I never knew who he was, and that's why we started the Commander X email that I still use today, because that was an email that we could just send back and forth to each other using that particular one. In fact, a lot of us, Sean Castile and some of the other writers would also use that email address, just basically it was almost like an in-house email for all of us. But yeah, and then and Tim was very closed-lipped about who the real Commander X was. I mean,
So it remains a mystery.
oh yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, and there were some names that later, people would put out there and then ask me, if such and such, person was Commander X, and I'd be like, I have no idea, to tell you the truth, you know. But yeah, and then at some point, he just disappeared. So I don't know if he passed away, which has always been my suspicion, that that he has died. And I was never the type of person that would push Tim to reveal his trade secret, so to speak. If Tim wanted to tell me, and for most of the stuff that we worked on, he was very upfront about everything. All right. But if there was something that he wasn't going to tell me, I never pushed him about it. One of those was who Commander X was. And we would joke, back and forth at times about people who were Commander X, because I'd throw some names out there and Tim was like, it's a possibility, that sort of thing.
I've had meetings with people who ultimately wound up never being on the show and not wanting to draw attention to their research, but I've spoken to a lot of people, and Commander X comes up quite a lot. And something in the Commander X writings they found that piqued their curiosity or added a
It's probably that other hat.
I'm sorry? Oh, I thought I heard somebody talking.
Yeah, it was Setna.
Oh, it was Sedna. Okay, Sedna's
Yeah.
on this picture. Okay, thank you so very much, Tim, for adding that dimension to what we know about Tim Beckley. And I will come back to you again, but we're going to move now to Carole. Carole, tell us your tale.
Well, I've told, but I'll tell it again and add a few other things. I met Tim when I was a teenager, and I went to some of his gatherings at Wally Emlark's house. At that time, she was the first witch. I was interested in Wicca and witchcraft. She was the first real glamour witch I ever saw. And in her home, she had some trainings. I think Carole Rodriguez was attended some of those. I remember meeting these people a long time ago, but never actually getting friendly with them. But I knew who they were. And that gathering, apparently Wally was the girlfriend of what was the name of his son? Is an actor. He used to be on a TV show, something in the Mans, it was called.
I don't
Do you
know.
recall
Freddie
that actor?
Freddie Prince.
Freddie Prince. Yes,
Fre-
she was. They were boyfriend girlfriend, and that time I was an innocent thing, so I didn't know this, but Tim was involved in the nightclub scene, heavy duty nightclub scene, because Wally knew Jimi Hendrix and other people. I think she even worked with um, some well-known rock stars in the day. So that was my start with him. And then I had a sighting long ago. And of course, he was interested in UFOs. So that really was my major interest in him. Oh, I was interested in Wicca and the glamour, girls with all the makeup and the fantastic jewelry and being so beautiful and whatever. And I was a girl who wanted to be like that then. And I was also interested in UFOs, and there were a few people in New York City who were involved, but Tim was the man. He was the center. He knew everybody. So I believe I did a podcast. I think Tim was on it. I think maybe it was your podcast with Tim, with Tim Beckley, when we talked about New York City in the 1970s and 80s, and he answered questions. There was places I never knew about. It was called Flying Saucer News. It was a little store in the West 40s, and I would pass by it, but I was always too afraid to go in. And I would have known Tim better because he used to work there. So he talked about that, talked about many other things in New York City, answered some questions that I did not know. And I was very involved. He did this fantastic UFO conference. It was nothing else like that in New York City, in the Hotel Commodore, long ago. I don't remember anything about it except there was a huge alien made out of tinfoil when you walked in, and lots of flyers. And there were certain people who have now passed away. I've learned real New York City characters. Lots of fun, lots of fun. And then I kind of forgot everything. I forgot about my sighting. I got involved in making a living, in finishing my education and all that. And then I reconnected with Tim in the early 2000s, maybe even before. So I did him, and he remembered me because I went out to Arizona. I went out to something he did in Phoenix, where he's that this John, not, it wasn't John Lear. They talked about John Lear. He was there, but there were people who showed up that are sort of legendary. So Tim really knew his stuff, and he knew a lot of people. Always had an answer for any question I had. We reconnected. I asked about all the people I had met, like Wally, Elmlark, Purple, I think that was his name. He was a rock star, not a star, but a rock musician. All these people that he was involved with, many of whom passed away, sadly. There was Kalman. He was a Hungarian colonel, and he was hysterical. You'd go to an event, and he would be he was a loudspeaker. He could be heard in New Jersey if he was in Brooklyn. He was really something. Did you know him, Tim? Kalman? He was really something. Of course, Antonio Huneeus. I met Bud Hopkins. I met Dr. The doctor from Harvard, very famous doctor from Harvard who did UFO investigations, well, abductee investigations. He was something else. So we went through all that. He reminded me, I still have the emails somewhere. I should go through them again, back and forth. And I'd see him sometimes. I'd run into him on the street. So we weren't friends, but he remembered me very well. And another group that I attend called New York Disclosure with Nick Curto, Nick asked me to do a reading on Ingo Swann at one of one of his podcasts. And Mark and Phyllis spoke at that time. You know, Mark and Phyllis Brinkerhoff.
Yes.
He spoke and then brought attention to the podcast. And then Tim said, "Hey, you can talk." So he invited me to go on his podcast. And he was quite a character. He wouldn't tell me things. One of his podcasts began with a flying saucer that flew down 8th Avenue. I loved that opening, and I told him. And it's actually somebody in my building must have filmed it, because it was filmed from a balcony in the building opposite mine, which is part of our co-op, but he would never tell me who it was. I asked him several times. So someone over there knew Tim and did work for Tim as well. One of my neighbors somewhere. So that's basically how I touched base with Tim at the beginning, and how I came back to Tim, and we got friendlier than before. We became, let's say, good acquaintances. So I miss him. I read his books. I went on his conferences. I did. I was very much involved with a lot of his presentations, and I'm very sorry I missed some years there, because other things like life came in the way that I had to take care of. But I'm concerned that people are forgetting him. So it was very exciting when I read that this UFO library is taking his books in. I think it's up in upstate New York, if you recall.
I don't
the
recall where
email?
it was, but yes, I remember I shared that
Yes.
information. I got it from his niece.
Yeah, yes, I think it's great because I've been on other podcasts, and some of the younger people don't know who he is. They think he's ancient and passé, and he made a contribution to this field. And I wish people would be understand that at the beginning it wasn't filled with scientists. People weren't looking at it seriously, so there's a bit of silliness to it, and but seriousness. And if you were interested or you had an experience, someone to go to talk about it. And who knows, many years later, I've come across people who wished they had known Tim and had gone to him. That's pretty much my story with Tim. And I want to continue uh, in his memory. And I'm going to read some of his books that I didn't read, like the Commander X books. I know about them, but I didn't read them. I got to write a chapter in one of his books on Wally M. Lark. It's a picture of me in there. Not well written, but still, it's a memory. She's somebody that Tim liked a lot, and she was a very interesting person. Sadly, she committed suicide, so
I'm
I was
sorry.
very surprised when he told me that.
Well,
But
if you want to, because I'm working on new shows for next year, and right now I'm having spinal problems. I've been pretty open about that and sharing with people. So my mobility and my balance are a little thrown off. But I told my wife that I'm planning when I beat this to start getting into paranormal exploration again, to become active like we were in Pennsylvania. So
mhm.
part of the ideas for that show was to do reviews of Tim's books, and both Tim's books actually. So that was something that I wanted to bring up privately, but since you mentioned it, I'd be honored if you would do reviews of the Tim books that you read on this show.
Sure, sure. I'm doing a review for a book right now for my friend's podcast, but he's sort of political. It's actually a very interesting book called Badass Librarians. Now, if you see a book with a title like that, you're going to want to look at it and find out what it's about. So it's
That's
got some good paranormal
worthy
stuff
of
in it.
Tim. Carole, thank you so much. That was another dimension to Tim Beckley that we learned about, and it just shows what a complicated person he was, and how much of a positive influence he's had in our lives. Brian Young just tuned in, so he'll be joining us at
Sure.
some point. And now we move on to Setna of Knemet, also known as Michael K. Waterman.
Hi, everybody. I will say that my knowledge of Tim was just looking at books and things, and I did learn about the movies and such. The movie that was involved with the zombies and vampires and such, that was of interest to me. And the movie about Ed Wood, because I knew Ed Wood was a nut job. I wish I had met him. But The Curse of Ed Wood would be, well, if anybody would do any films like him, I imagine. I was very knowledgeable for a long time. I was involved, I should say, with Hans Holzer and his work with ghosts and things. And he was very much involved with knowing and working, I think, on an outside level with Tim Beckley, mostly with UFOs and ghosts and things. Hans was very involved with ghosts. And I think that they had were collaborators from time to time. Did you speak to Hans Holzer on your show, Hercules?
No, Hans Holzer was one of the people that what do you call it? I knew of him and I was aware of his work and I enjoyed his work, but we never connected. I connected with Brad Steiger and I connected with John Keel and Antonio Huneeus and Stanton Friedman and a bunch of other people in the community, but never with Hans Holzer.
Well, in 1976, I met Hans at Nassau Community College. He was doing a lecture on ghosts and, of course, the Amityville horror nonsense, which literally was a lot of nonsense. The kid, DeFeo, was high as a kite when he killed his family and was horrified when he realized what happened. But that began my interest in those things like ghosts and ghost research and such. And like I said, I was very interested in the Tim Wood film, Ed Wood film, excuse me, because I thought Ed Wood's movies were frankly scary as hell, and not on purpose. They were really very silly. You know, what was I going to say? Plan 9 from Outer Space and others. They were, oh, they were hysterical. And I felt like Tim's movies were kind of in that same sort of zany vein, not necessarily. And Tim, don't get mad at me, but it was like kind of filmed in a way like Blair Witch too, like off the cuff and just off the wall. And I really liked that. I was very much involved with doing props and things for trauma films. I didn't get to work on my favorite one, which was the Toxic Avenger, but I did some little clay figures for them, and some rubber and latex and silicone masks that they used. They actually ruined on me. But I thought that their films mimicked Tim's in a way too, because they were that kind of, like real, like off the cuff film, and like Tim was saying, they looked like they were filmed like you were running, and it was just weird. And I liked that. I really did. I
That's some
thought
of
it
the
was
connection we have. I worked with trauma. I knew Lloyd Kaufman very well.
okay. Yeah,
Saw his
yeah.
show a lot. Lloyd was in my movie. He let me use a Toxic Avenger and Sergeant Kabuki Man in my film as well. So there's another area where we might have
Well,
crossed.
Kabuki Man was something I did work on because I was still going to school for makeup. I wasn't very good. And they didn't care that I wasn't very good because it wasn't very good was perfect for them, you know. So that was kind of fun. I learned a lot about using clown white and what they called big clay liners and things to do all kinds of weird stuff. But I thought when I saw Tim's films that they were a lot like Toxic Avenger and such. They all reminded me of each other. So it was kind of cool. And I later on when you see Blair Witch and the way that's filmed, it's sort of, documentary like. And I felt a lot of yeah, my roommate just said stupid. Um, a lot of the a lot of the films were kind of in that vein, I think. The other ones that were the sexual films and things, I really wasn't interested in. But I knew they were kind of off the wall. But I enjoyed his work and I enjoyed, you know, learning about the UFOs and things from their point of view. I think that this whole television show now, Ancient Aliens and what have you, Tim, if he were alive, would be on there. Um, I would think as one of the hosts, because he was an investigator long before they ever existed.
Thank you very much. What do you call it? And again, you revealed another area where we probably crossed paths at some
Oh,
time.
I mean, it was a very small cities, Hercules, there was all kinds of stuff. I mean, the person that encouraged me to look at Tim Beckley's things was actually Herman Slater from Magical Child, who was very much a mentor of mine. And if you knew Herman, he was off the wall and zany, but when it came to the occult and magic and really working with spiritual things, he was right. He was very dead serious. And I enjoyed him very much.
Let's do a show on Herman. I knew Herman as well, not as well as you did, but I did.
I knew him since I was about almost 13 and a half when he had the Warlock shop in Brooklyn.
Brooklyn, yeah.
And the way I met him was he came and lectured in the library in Uniondale, where I grew up. And we were all laughing because he's going on and on about witches, and almost everybody in the audience was a witch. We were all like, yeah, okay. And there was about 3 covens in the audience. So, and he didn't seem to notice that. We were all giggling and thinking it was really very funny. But so as I got to know him, I learned about everyone, other authors and things. And yes, I'd love to do a show on Herman because I loved him very much.
Thank you very much, Setna.
Michael, excuse me, I just want to mention that Michael was in one of the Long Island covens at the very, very beginning of the Wicca movement in the United States, right, Michael?
Yes, yes, it was
I
called
don't
the
know if I
Circle.
should say it.
The coven
Mhm.
was called the Circle of Those Who Know, which I never understood because I didn't know what we knew. But it was a
Oh, you
very
can
old
go on.
group. They were around for years and years and years. I was a neophyte, and then I became a priest, and then a high priest through those people. I became their high priest junior high priest, I will say. The old high priest was still there, but I became a junior high priest in 1977.
Wow.
Memories, God almighty.
We have new panelists joining us today, Brian Young and Tim Swartz said a lot of great things about you, so I'm looking forward to interacting with you.
Well, see, now that scares me because Tim Swartz lies a lot.
Not Tim Swartz, no.
And if he said good things, and everybody, please forgive the wonkiness of my camera. I was trying to sign on my laptop, which of course hates me and wants to update as I'm trying to sign on. So I purposely downloaded Zoom to my phone, and I'm on my phone, and I look terrible. And
Oh, no, you don't. I am too. I'm on my
honored that
phone
you're
too.
here. We're in the age of information, and technical glitches are part of our everyday reality. But I'm glad that you're here. So tell us about yourself. I know you're a podcaster. I was looking at your Facebook page and some other information. And how did you connect with Tim Beckley?
I am a lifelong Tim Beckley fan. Now, this will shock most people in your audience, and Tim knows this. He probably didn't warn you. I'm the world's biggest skeptic, too. I am not a believer in just about anything. I'm not a debunker. I'm not one of those people who's completely closed-minded and says everything's, poo-poo. I don't know what the ratings on the show are. I don't know what I can say and can't say. So I'll say poo-poo.
Whatever YouTube happens to allow at the present moment.
That's right. So, but I've always had this fascination and this love of everything strange and weird and paranormal. And I blame being a child of the 70s, and I blame Leonard Nimoy, and I blame In Search of for my love of all this. And of course, being a child of the 70s, falling in love with this, if it wasn't the Time Life book series, it was Tim Beckley books that I was going after and reading. So fast forward many years, I start doing a show. I'm a history guy. I'm a writer and a researcher and a historian. But I decide when I start my podcast, we're going to talk about whatever we want. If I want to talk about ancient Greek literature, we're going to talk about ancient Greek literature. And if I want to talk about Bigfoot next week, we're going to talk about Bigfoot. And, I've had everything from Nobel Prize winning physicists to, some of the biggest names in entertainment, like Tim Swartz. I mean, you don't get much bigger than that.
No, the legendary Tim Swartz. You have to
legendary Tim Swartz. And one day I was sitting around and I said, I wonder if I could get Timothy Green Beckley to come on my show. So I looked him up, did a little research, found an email address for him, emailed him. Lo and behold, less than a day later, I get a response from him. And it turns out he knew who I was, and he knew what my show was. And my show was not very big at the time. It was relatively new. And he even told me, oh, yeah, your show's mentioned in my book that's coming out.
All right.
And I'm like, okay, that's a little weird. But that's when he was, and it was when he showed me. There it was. He was talking about a fact that he learned on Transatlantic History Ramblings podcast. So I said, okay, this is a match made in heaven. When I asked him to come on the show, and he agreed, and we had an amazing conversation. Well, no, I take that back. You don't have a conversation with Tim Beckley. You would say something and then let Tim go. You just took the leash off and you let him run wild. And it was one of the most entertaining 2-hour show I ever had. And from that day forward, I don't think 2 or 3 days went by without me getting an email from Tim. And sometimes it was about this new project he was working on. Other times it was just like cut and paste headlines from entertainment magazines from 30 years ago. You never knew what Tim was going to send you. And he was just one of the greatest guys I ever met. I mean, he was just, as I tell everybody, he was out of his friggin' mind nuts. and I loved him for it. He was so crazy in such the good way of crazy. And I miss him every day. That's my introduction to Tim. Now, if you want to know about me, everybody sit back, light a cigar, relax, and I'll give you the rundown of my life. Just
Awesome.
kidding, I won't do that. But I do have to say, the greatest thing that came out of my meeting with Tim Beckley is the friendship I developed with Tim Swartz, who I've come to not only admire and be a fan of, but I love the guy. He's one of my favorite people in the entire world. And
Ditto,
Tim, I think you
ditto
set the
Tim,
record for appearances on my show, Tim.
close with him. He's very well beloved by very many people.
He is just Tim Schwartz and I think we share a brain separated by several hundred miles, because I will send him music or movie recommendations. Never once has he said, that sucked. And which is unheard of, because most people I send recommendations to write back and say, please don't ever write me again. But I am the resident skeptic who is an absolute Tim Beckley fanatic, who loved everything he stood for. Very similar to the reason I love Tim Swartz is because he's a skeptic. You will never know it, but a true skeptic is someone who will question and not just accept. Too many people in this field just accept. And Beckley and Swartz were true skeptics, and that's part of what I admired about them. And everybody here, I'm fans of all of your work too, by the way.
Well, thank you. I'm greatly honored.
Michael, we have a trauma connection as well. I live in the Buffalo, New York area, which is one of their big filming locations now. They always shoot Buffalo, Niagara Falls now, so there's that connection too. I'm a film nut too. I'm a film nerd, so it's bad.
I met them when they had a crazy, like, 5x5 studio in Chelsea. This little skinny, horrible black tar paper, really close. And I made clay figures. There were trees, tree monsters and things. And then somebody animated them. They were about that big. And they said to me, can you make them so that they can be crushed? And I was like, they're made out of plasticine. Of course you can crush them. They were painted with acrylic paint.
That's fantastic. Although, too bad you crushed. You should have kept at least one and said,
well, they
this
broke
is the
them
trauma
all
you
up.
used.
I can make more. I make them now out of Sculpey, which I can heat, and they become hard. And I do other.
Do you still work with them at all?
No, I'm here in Savannah. I moved January 10th. I moved out of Newark, New Jersey to Savannah, Georgia, and I love it here. I wouldn't move now for the world. Well, for the right price, maybe, but not right now.
All right, Schwartz, why didn't you tell me you got this weirdo on here who moves to the South in the summer? Okay, that's just wrong.
I didn't. I moved in January 10th.
Oh, January 10th. Okay, that's okay then.
It was 46 degrees in New Jersey.
Movie. I was invited at the Lake Placid because I had a television show and they wanted me to cover the Lake Placid Film Forum. So in the few days that we were there, we shot a short of us coming to film at the Lake Placid Film Festival. So people were bringing us like furs and taking us to their boats and all sorts of stuff like that. So Lloyd put it up during trauma time. So we made a short and it showed at the film festival that we've been invited to cover during the same thing, thanks to Lloyd Kaufman. He too, like Tim, is one of these unusual 1 in a million people, full of creativity and unique vision. So I'm glad to meet fellow Traumites.
And I loved what you were saying about the Ed Wood stuff, because I'm one of those. I hate to say this because it makes it sound like I'm trying to like pat myself on the back and brag.
Oh, you can. Go ahead.
but I've lectured at schools and libraries and all kinds of film archives and places on different filmmakers. And I mean, I've done lectures on Kurosawa, and I've done lectures on Pasolini, and I've done lectures on Lynch, and I've done, the great filmmakers in history. But my favorite films of all time are horror films and low budget films of the 50s. I mean, to this day, I remember I was doing a lecture on Fellini,
Oh God.
and we were talking about a question and answer thing afterwards. And the point of my lecture was I liked his early films better. Even though I love weird films, I liked his early films like La Strada better. Just had the point. We get to a question and answer period, and someone asked me, "Oh, what are your favorite films to watch?" And I said, "Oh, I'm a horror movie nut." And the room was stunned because it was the room of all these, hoity, artsy people there for a Fellini. Like low budget horror films.
Like Basket Case?
I was wearing my Basket Case T-shirt earlier.
I got them all for $1 in the supermarket once. They're so good. They're so bad. They're good.
Oh, Frank Henenlotter was a great filmmaker. Not only was I wearing a Basket Case T-shirt yesterday, my girlfriend Sarah, hi Sarah, gets very mad at me when I wear my Frankenhooker T-shirt out in public.
That's a great bad movie. It's hysterical.
Unfortunately, we have to start wrapping up because it's almost 10 o'clock, and I'd like to give everybody a chance to share how people can contact them. So I'm going to invite you all back, and we'll continue this particular conversation. And
I won't be late next time.
I'm looking forward to it. You're a very interesting person, and everything Tim said about you seems to be more than true.
The devilishly handsome.
Yes, he's a debonair. What do you call it? Traveler, and all sorts of things. So Tim, how can people contact you? Where can they find you? How can they enter the wonderful world that not only have you inherited from Tim Beckley, but you've created a greater manifestation of it through your own works?
Sure, and I just want to add really quick that Troma Films really wanted to distribute our movies. But Beckley couldn't come to an agreement with them because they just wanted to pay a lump sum and with no residuals. And Beckley was like, "No, the sweet part is the residuals." So unfortunately, our movies never got distributed by Tromas. But if you want to find out more about me, probably the best way will be to check out my books, which you can find best on Amazon.com. Just type in my name, Tim R. Swartz, and they'll all come tumbling out for your reading pleasure. Our most recent book is called Weird Time, Exploring the Mysteries of Time and Space, and both Hercules and Setna have absolutely fantastic chapters in that book, so I recommend that everyone go out and buy yourself 5 or 6 copies. The website for that book is weirdtimebook.com.
Thank you so very much, sir. Carole, how can people enter your world?
My world isn't as interesting as what other people here have talked about, but I'm always willing to share stories. I want to hear people who've had UFO experiences like I have, or are in the Fellowship of Isis, or Wicca, or the occult world. I'm always interested in discussing such matters. My name is Carole Linda Gonzales, and I'm on Facebook, and that's how you can get in contact with me.
Thank you very much, Carole. And Setna of Knemet, Setna Comwest, the one and only.
Okay, it's very easy. I'm also on Facebook. Michael K. Waterman, my real name. You can get me also on the Perniteru site on Facebook or on Instagram. You can get me at Phone a Wizard, because I'm the wizard of Phone a Wizard. That is my work site. You can get me at mkwaterman@icloud.com, or you can call me if you want to, 516-650-3691. I kept my Long Island phone number because I have too many damn contacts, and I was too lazy to change it. And I don't want a Georgia thing, although 912 is their area code, and they were laughing at me because that's my birthday. So that was kind of cool. And of course, you can reach me through you, of course, Hercules, always.
Thank you very much. And Setna and I are working on a lot of different projects together. So more on those as they become made manifest. And our new person, Brian Young, who seems to be
Hey!
legendary as well. How can people enter your world, listen to your podcasts, read your writings, and go on adventures with you?
Going on adventures with me is not fun. I'm old and crippled and I can barely walk now, and I'm not nearly as much fun as I look. But you can listen to my show, Transatlantic History Ramblings, hosted by myself in Buffalo, New York, US of A, and my co-host Lauren Davies from Swansea, Wales in the UK, a truly transatlantic show. It's available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google, just every podcast platform you can find Transatlantic History Ramblings. My writings, my latest book is, like I said, I'm a history writer, so you never know the topic. My latest book is a book about wrestling history called The Wrestlers, Masters of the Craft of Professional Wrestling, which is available on Amazon or at all fine book retailers, written by myself and the great Dan Murphy, the wrestling historian and writer. You could usually find me on Facebook, except the fact that my name is so common. There's about 3 million of us, so that might be tough. And every now and again, you'll see me pop up on Tim Schwartz's podcast. So you might find me there. But hopefully you'll also be able to find me here more often, because I love what you're doing and I love your show and it's so much fun. And now I have it on my phone, so I can't even pretend I can't log on.
Well, thank you, and you will be invited when we have our forums, and hopefully you are free or could make some time to come on them, and I'm really looking forward to it. And you're also a mind reader, even though you're a skeptic, because I was going to mention Tim's podcast, and to let him know that of all the things people stop me for, increasingly more people stop me and say, "I heard you on the Paracast." So your podcast is very well known, and I'm learning that very many people I've known in many different capacities, including political capacities, are Paracast fans. So,
Oh, I may have said some things on that that got me in trouble then.
oh no, I'm a politician too. I'm an elected official. Seriously. A minor official, but still I'm an elected official. So you said nothing that could get you in trouble or anybody else.
No, on that show I might have.
Oh, and his show.
Paracast.
Well, now that you've been on this show, let's see if they let me know. You know that guy,
That's
on. Let me tell you. And we have time for everybody to leave our audience with a thought. It could be any thought that's in your mind. It could pertain to tonight's topic, and we'll start with Tim again.
Oh goodness, put me on the spot trying to come up with a thought on my mind, which my mind generally has no thoughts at all. It's just like this continuous like that. But no, I'll just say that, like Brian said, we're talking about Tim Beckley, and I think about him every day, and I miss him every day. So hopefully we will meet again someday.
I hope so too. Mark Brinkerhoff says that he pops in and talks to him. So I wanted to focus on that more in a future show. So let's see what happens. Carole, how can people take a thought from you and let it get planted and grow in their mind? What would you have to share?
Only that Tim was an amazing person. I knew one other person who was like that, who was an expert on languages, and he brought me into the craft way before. He brought me into the craft, and also the appreciation of Tolkien. So I have a Tolkien meetup group if anybody wants to join it, and also, of course, Lord J.R.R. Tolkien and George Martin. So we also talk about Game of Thrones and all the stories that Martin wrote, and we got to meet him. We have one of our members is a friend of his. So Tim was just like Alexei was, an amazing man.
Thank you very much. Setna,
Yes, sir.
do you have any thoughts you'd like to leave with people, or something you'd like to add to our discussion on Tim Beckley?
Well, I think what I would say is that what I learned from him was that never, don't count anything out. That the impossible just might be possible, and that he just, he gave the world a way to say, just question everything, and if there are no answers, make them up.
There
That's
you
what it
go.
seems to me, with all these alien theorists, that if you don't know what you're talking about, you might end up being a politician.
Well, I did, I guess. So and Brian Young, what thoughts or what wisdom do you have to share?
But my final thoughts on Tim for the night are, I truly loved and missed the guy, and he showed me that it is absolutely 100% acceptable to be completely ADHD and to have a million interests and a million things going on in your head at one time, and it's perfectly fine to be that way. But the last thing I want to say is my co-host Lauren Davies so eloquently put it on the tribute show we had to him right after he passed, is that Mr. UFO didn't die, he just went home.
There you go. Thank you so very much to all of you. I'm greatly honored that you're here, and I always look forward to these shows. You're wonderful people, and I'm looking forward to our next show together.
Thank you so much.
And let's see if I can find the right button. I get lost at a particular point.
Oh dear. Oh my.